Hola, bienvenidos a la lección 3. Welcome to the third lesson. This lesson includes numbers from 0 to 99, the verb I, and talking about the time of vigorous activities with the question ¿a qué hora? Just so you know, in this lesson I will go relatively fast, or at least faster than the previous lessons, because this is just vocabulary that you just have to memorize and you have to do that part, okay? Let's start with numbers from 0 to 29. I will just read them out loud so you can stop at the one that you think you need to practice the pronunciation of, and I will explain some patterns that you might be able to find, okay? Here, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Notice that from 11 to 15, they all end in se. I have underlined this similarity, so you just have to learn the first part. 11, 12, 13, 14, right? It's different from cuatro, 4, 14, 14. Quince. If you don't know the QU rule, why does it sound like K and we don't pronounce the U, you can watch the pronunciation video. I leave it up here. And then from 16 to 19, it's 16, 17, 18, 19. If you look at numbers from 16 to 19, you might have noticed that it sounds as if we're saying 10 and 6, 10 and 7, 10 and 8, 10 and 9. So they all start with 10. I have underlined the similarities. In this case, it's easier because it's 10 and the normal name of the number, right? If you write it, then if you spell it, you might have to add the accent mark. But speaking, it sounds the same. When you pronounce it, it sounds the same, so you don't have to worry about that. So 16, 17, 18, 19. Then from 20 to 29. 20 is the only one that's different, right? Because it ends in E. It's 20. 20. E-I. 20. Okay? Then from 21 to 29, instead of 20, we will change this last letter to an I. 20. So that would leave us with 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. All of these numbers from 21 to 29 start with 20, and luckily again the normal name of the number. 21, 22. So that's also easier. That tells us that from 10 to 15, those are the most kind of irregular ones that you have to memorize, and just make sure that you understand. Okay, 13, 13. 11 will be 11. 15, 15. Okay? Let me just underline the similarities from 21 to 29. There you go. So now I hope this makes it easier for you to notice the patterns that we have when we say the numbers in Spanish. Don't forget to practice so you can memorize this. And now let's move on to numbers from 30 to 99. Luckily, it gets easier, right? Here, we just have to memorize this column, right? It's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. From 40 to 90, it ends in enta, okay? 30 ends in ainta, but don't worry about that. Just memorize this and you'll see that the rest is really easy, okay? Now, when we have 30 something, 40 something, we just say 30 and the number, like 30 and 1, 30 and 5, 50 and 6, 50 and 9, okay? Here you have some examples. 31 is 31. Now, of course, when we speak fast and naturally, we say this as one big word, 31. I'll read the rest of these numbers right here the same way. First, I'll read it slow and then how we would normally say it. 42, 42. 54, 54. 65, 65. 76, 76. 88, 88. 99, 99. Before we do the exercise, I will write something here for you. Okay, I want you to try to learn this as a tongue twister. It means 5, 15, 55. But my goal here is that you're able to identify, okay, 5, 15, and 50. Well, in this case, 55, but 50, right? Because most of my students, they get confused with these numbers, especially, I don't know why 5 is hard for them. So you can take this as some practice for pronunciation, and I want you to try it now. I will read it for you first, and then I want you to try to say it as fast as you can, okay? 5, 15, 55. Now I'll say it fast. 5, 15, 55. 5, 15, 55. 5, 15, 55. Okay, now your turn. Pause the video. Muy bien. And just to remind you, I will write what these numbers are, okay? 5, 15, 55. Also, before we do el ejercicio rápido, I want you to notice how from 0 to 29, every number is one word, right? There's no space to separate. We're not saying 20 and 1, like with spaces between these words. It is just one big word, right? That matters if you're spelling, if you're writing Spanish, right? If you speak, you won't be able to tell, right? But when we write from 30 on, like 30 something, 31, 32, then we do write different words separated by spaces, blank spaces, okay? So 30 space, y space, uno. Okay, now moving on, let's do el ejercicio rápido. Write these numbers in the comment section. Pause the video and I'll leave the answer in the comment section as well. Muy bien, let's move on to the next thing. And that's the verb I. I is the present form of the verb haber, right? So the base form, the not changed form of the verb I is haber. Now, I is used to express the existence of something in a specific place. What does that mean? That's the equivalent to saying there is or there are in English. For example, we would say, hay un libro en la mesa. That means there is a book on the table. So I here means there is. Now, in the next phrase, it says, hay dos sillas en la oficina, which means there are two chairs on it, at the office, right? So at the office. Now, just notice how here it means there is, and here it means there are. Okay, so I means there is, there are. And in most cases, we will say en. So there is something en a place, en or an object, right? So on the table, at the office, at school, at university, en. You can, however, start with the en part. Let's look at this last example. It says en la sala, which means in the living room, hay tres ventanas. There are three windows. So you can start with en la sala or you can start with hay, right? It doesn't really matter. It's not more formal. It's not more common. You can use it however you want. I'll just read and translate these sentences now so you can have more vocabulary, hopefully. Hay muchos estudiantes en la universidad, which means there are a lot of students at university. in the university, right? Hay un perro en el jardín. There is a dog in the garden. Hay tres ventanas. There are three windows. En la sala, in the living room. And the same sentence but with a different order. En la sala hay tres ventanas. In the living room, there are three windows. Now we have un ejercicio rápido. Translate into Spanish. You have an English sentence here, and I want you to write the Spanish translation. Okay, pause the video. Okay, and you will find the answers in the comment section as well. Okay. Before we move on to the next topic, I just want to remind you that at this point, you should have listened to minimum an hour of Spanish. How can you do that? You might think, well, it's really hard to find videos of my level of something that I can understand with the grammar that I've studied and only the grammar that I've studied and find so many of them that I could in total watch an hour. You don't need that. You can find one or two videos that you're comfortable with and watch them over and over and do different things with them. You can try to work on your listening skills. You can try to identify the grammar or vocabulary that you have studied. You might focus on adding new vocabulary so you can use that structure that you learned with many other words, right? Structures are simple and a structure is useful if you know vocabulary. If you know a structure but you don't know any words, then that's probably not going to be really useful, right? And it's fine to speak in basic structures at first, right? Then once you're intermediate, advanced, as you go on, as you move on, then it would be okay to find 10 different ways of saying the same thing, right? But for now, you just need to convey a message, convey a meaning, and if you have a basic structure that you can do that with, then focus on that structure. Try to speak about your life, speak or write about your life, right? If you're a teacher, talk about your students. If you're an engineer, talk about your job, the materials you work with, or the numbers. They will be more important to you, I guess. I'm not an engineer, right? If you're a psychologist, look for personality words or feelings because that's probably something that you might want to talk about with other people. So now, before we finally move on, just remember these lessons do not include enough vocabulary whatsoever. This is just a general grammar structure course. This is not a complete finish this course and you'll be totally fluent course. Okay, you should be complementing with vocabulary at least and tons of listening. Okay, now the next topic is a qué hora. A qué hora means at what time, and we use it to, of course, ask about time when something happens. Let's read this. A qué hora is used to ask about the time a particular event takes place. So if you want to ask what time is the party tomorrow, you will use this structure, okay? Now, to indicate at what time something happens, we use a las plus time, okay? Notice how we repeat a here and a here, okay? So let's look at some examples. The basic structure is a qué hora plus the verb ser for now because that's the only one we know, but you can see that you can change this verb for any other verb and it would probably be okay, right? But for now, let's just focus on ser because that's the one we have studied before, plus an activity or an event. Por ejemplo, ¿a qué hora es la reunión? Means what time or at what time is the meeting, a reunion, yeah, but a meeting. So at what time is the meeting? And the answer, because we said it here, is a las plus the time. Oh, a las ocho. A las ocho. Just so you know, the only exception is the number 1. You would say una with an A, and instead of a las, you would use a la. I'll write this here. Okay, so now here is the more complete, the better rule, right? We use a las plus the time when it's from 2 to 12. or a la when it's one. Okay, moving on. I'll just again read this and translate. ¿A qué hora es la clase de yoga? At what time is the class of yoga? What time is the yoga class? A las 6 de la tarde. At 6 p.m. in the afternoon, okay? ¿A qué hora es la película? What time is the movie, la película? A las 9 de la noche. At 9 of the night, which means 9 at night. And here you have some useful vocabulary. When the time ends in 00, we would say en punto. So this would be 6 en punto. That's kind of like sharp on the dot, okay? 15, we say quarter, and in Spanish, then we would add y cuarto, and a quarter, okay? So we would say 6 y cuarto for 6:15. Now, if the time ends in 30, then we would say and a half, which is y media. So 6:30 would be 6 y media. Now, this is optional, but just know that people use this a lot. You can also just say 6:15, 15, or 6:30, 6:30. Muy bien. We also have these three phrases here. De la mañana, that's what we use when we're talking about time, and it means in the morning. De la tarde, it means in the afternoon, and de la noche means at night. Okay, notice how the last word is different: morning, evening, afternoon, and night. But we say de la in all of them. Okay, muy bien. Again, this lesson will be faster because you should be memorizing all of this. I will just explain it, what it means, how to use it. So I am counting on you for that, okay? Now let's do un ejercicio rápido. Translate into Spanish. Now you would need to translate each of these questions and answers from English to Spanish. You can write your answers to all three exercises in one YouTube comment if you don't want to make several YouTube comments, okay? And pause the video and I'll give you the answers in the comments as well, okay? Now, once you practice all of these things enough, you should be able to master the numbers from 0 to 99. Master is a strong word, right? Of course, that depends on how well you memorize them and if you practice using, uno, dos, tres, cuatro. In my experience learning languages, numbers, you just have to memorize them, right? If it's different for you, let me know in the comments. But that's something that you just have to memorize. It's vocabulary. Luckily, there are some patterns once you notice them, so it will be easier. You should also be able to use I, which is a conjugation of haber, which means there is or are, to talk about the existence of things in different places. And you should be able to ask and indicate the time of various activities or events using a qué hora plus the verb ser, right? Yes, in the future you will be able to change the verb ser for any other verb, but for now focus on the verbs you know and try to make, you can make, I promise, a million different sentences with just one verb. So practice this one verb over and over, okay? Now, some suggestions. The first one is not here, I just want to tell you. If you add all of these things that you should be able to, that I always write at the end of each lesson, you should be able to do a lot of things, right? So that's why I always tell you, get comfortable with one lesson, practice enough, and then practice some more, and then move on to the second lesson. Remember that in between lessons, I always give you suggested listening activities or reading or something. That's because that will be a good complement that's accurate for the current grammar and vocabulary knowledge that you have. So imagine you have like a checklist in your brain, like, okay, in Spanish, I can do this, 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 and that, okay? So the more things you are comfortable doing, the longer that list will be. Try to do that, okay? And now, okay, reading the actual suggestions that I wrote. Relate language to your reality to make it meaningful and practical, as I said before. You should learn how to say numbers that are relevant to you, like your age, the age of your family members, the number of students, clients, patients you have or study or work with, right? Create scenarios using I to describe what exists in different locations, focusing on places that you typically visit, right? Invest extra effort in learning relevant vocabulary. Remember, you should be studying your own vocabulary, the one that's meaningful for you, for places that you visit in your daily life. This will make this simple structure useful in real life situations in your life, okay? And what I said before, by this point, you should have listened to a lot of Spanish, right? Over and over. You can be 1, 2, 3 videos. One, you can focus on one video and watch it over and over and over. Get used to the language, the speed, the intonation, the pronunciation, all of that, okay? That's enough. Consistent listening practice enhances your comprehension and reinforces the concepts covered in the lessons. Okay, muy bien. That's all I have to say. I hope this was a shorter lesson. Good luck with your practice, do the exercises, and if you want to do some extra practice, I will leave some suggestions in the website. Okay, adios!